Let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Beth McLaughlin, and I'm the Artistic Director and Chief Curator here at Fuller Craft Museum. I'd like to welcome everyone to our latest Collection Spotlight, a monthly series in which we highlight a work from our permanent collection and the artist behind its creation. Today, I am so thrilled to be here with multidisciplinary artist and designer Jayna Zweiman, who will be sharing information about her background and her socially engaged craft practice, including the co-founding of the Pussyhat Project. After Jayna's presentation, she and I will have a chat, and then we will open it up to audience Q&A. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat at any time during the program. I also wanted to let everybody know that we're recording the program and it will be available at a later date on our YouTube channel and I believe on our website as well. Our mission at Fuller Craft is to provide meaningful discovery of contemporary craft through exhibitions, collections, education, and public programs. We are committed to challenging perceptions and building appreciation of the material world, and our purpose at Fuller Craft is to inspire, stimulate, and enrich an ever-expanding community. If you are interested in learning more about us, please go visit our website. You can get information there on upcoming virtual programs, exhibitions, membership opportunities, and also our collection. So please check that out at fullercraft.org. Our permanent collection is comprised of over 800 objects in craft media. It is an ever-changing collection with new additions made every year. And I'd like to thank all the artists and donors who have helped us to build the collection over the years, along with staff, our collection committee members, and our board of trustees. I'd also like to take a minute just to recognize the Mass Cultural Council and our local cultural councils for supporting the Collection Spotlight program. And lastly, I'm grateful to everyone for joining us here today, including our board members, museum educators, and the staff who are here on this call with us. So without further delay, I would like to introduce our featured guest, Jayna Zweiman. Jayna is a multidisciplinary artist and designer whose independent practice combines architecture, art, craft, and new media to focus on experiences that overlap physical, virtual, and conceptual spaces. She is perhaps best known as the co-creator and co-founder of the Pussyhat Project, and she has become a leading advocate of using design innovation to enact social change. Jayna is also the creator and founder of Welcome Blanket, a reconceptualization of the 2,000-mile length of the proposed border wall in the form of individual welcome blankets for new immigrants coming into the U.S. Last spring, she started Masks for Humanity, a hub for essential workers and vulnerable groups that need cloth face masks and people who can make cloth masks. Jayna's work has been exhibited and published internationally. She has been nominated for the Beazley Design of the Year by the Design Museum in London. Her work has been acquired by the Victoria and Albert Museum and Fuller Craft Museum, and she was awarded the first ever Brand of the Year. Jayna was also named one of the 25 people who defined visual culture by Artsy, and she received her degree from Brown University in Visual Arts and Economics and her master's in architecture from Harvard University Graduate School of Design. So quite a long list of accomplishments. She currently lives and works in Los Angeles, so she's zooming in from across the country, and we're just thrilled to have her here today. Jayna and I first met back in 2018 at the opening of Revolution in the Making, the Pussyhat Project, which was an exhibition that I curated at Fuller Craft Museum. And I then had the great pleasure to work with her in 2019 when we brought Welcome Blanket to Fuller Craft Museum. And she has also helped us, along with Stephanie Kamerman, to procure one of the original test patterns of the Pussyhat in our permanent collection. So it is a pleasure to have her here today on our Collection Spotlight program. And I'm going to pass the mic over to her so that we can hear her discuss how to use design to enact social change. Welcome, Jayna.
Great. as I get an alert on my screen. There's a birthday coming up. First of all, I want to thank everyone who's here. I know that Zooming in is, even though we're not traveling anywhere in particular, it can be really hard to show up in the middle of the day onto a computer screen. So thank you, and a huge thanks to the Fuller Craft and to Beth McLaughlin, who is just, any day I get to talk with Beth is a great day. So this is already a great day for me. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you some of the progression that led to Pussyhat Project, talk about Pussyhat Project a little bit, Welcome Blanket a little bit, and a tiny bit about other stuff. I love questions, so I might go through this very, very quickly, but if there's something that you want to talk about, let's talk about it. Okay. And we tried this before, so we'll see if this works as well as we hope that it does. Okay, is this a full screen for everyone? Okay, wonderful. Okay, so as Beth mentioned, I did my undergraduate at Brown in visual arts, and this was my senior thesis. Hold on a second. Let me see. I'm screen sharing. Just so you know that I can't turn pages right now. Oh, here we go. I turned a page. This was my senior thesis. It was called Queenfield, and it was an exploration into color field painting, a lot about feminism and the female body. And then this was my first time really using yarn. And I didn't know how to knit yet. And I was looking at how lines become surfaces and spaces. Apparently I have to press this button. Okay, so from there, I started going out into the world, out into the indoors. And this is a project called Ascension, where I again use yarn as lines to delineate space, to transform the space that was already there and to highlight it. I went to the GSD for architecture school, and there I really did a lot of study into social justice and spatial justice, which didn't quite have that name back in 2004 to 8, and also public intimacy and civic intimacy, which to me is how do people actually interact in public spaces, and how do you make those kinds of interactions incredibly fruitful. This was a project in Boston where we had to figure out what we were going to do and where. I had been living in the South End, and this was a little bit over the border of Mass Ave, for everyone who's in Boston, in a park in a really, really difficult neighborhood where the first African-American public housing was built. So if you can imagine, it wasn't built very well in the 30s, and they were still dealing with a lot of the ramifications of being basically disenfranchised. We can talk more about that later. And then while I was at the GSD, I also got a fellowship to go to Haystack Mountain School of Crafts to learn how to do sculptural knitting with the great Catherine Kobe, because I was still really interested in these lines and surfaces and how to bring that kind of tactility into spaces. So after graduate school, instead of going into typical architectural practice, I talked my way in to be a game designer for an urban mobile scavenger hunt. And it was a way of figuring out how to bring people together, both digitally and physically, and do things beyond just kind of getting coupons and doing a scavenger hunt, but also like doing beach cleanups and flash mobs and getting to know different cities and understanding different spaces. And I was still thinking about how we can bring people together using our phones, using video. And this was a competition entry that I did with Christian Stainer of Stainer Architects for the Venice Biennale. And the idea was to take all these different special architectural gems throughout the United States and use 4-channel media to be able to be in those spaces within the Biennale, so that we can create these connections between people who could actually go to Venice in the summer and people who wouldn't be able to, but they might be able to experience wonderful architecture much closer to home. Okay. And then this is a project that I also did with Christian Stainer called 13.3% is an exasperated reply to those who say there are no women making architecture. And what we did is that we asked people to send in submissions in manila envelopes and answer 13.3 questions about what women in architecture means to them. And it was transgenerational. We got all sorts of different stuff, from models to, you can see the fold out. On the other side of that, it was Pritzker Prize winners without their pants on. We had some needlepoint that was put in there. And one of my favorites is this cloth brick by Alison Wilder. So that's a lot of kind of what I was doing. I was looking at different kinds of spaces. How do I bring people together? How can we work as groups to experience space both digitally and physically? And in 2013, when everything was kind of like working well, I had all my hours to become an official architect. I had a life-altering accident. So we have the black mark. I had a head and neck injury, which I'm still dealing with the ramifications for today. So that was in 2013. And just to kind of give you a sense, the first work I ever did after that was the Pussyhat Project. That was my project back in. And one of the ways that I dealt with sort of the healing process was this. This is kintsugi. And Beth might have a more official way of describing it. But for me, it was a way of patching up what was broken with gold. So using my own personal experiences to be able to do better work in ways that I was able to operate. And so in the spring of 2016, I roped in a friend, Krista Sa, who's co-founder of the Pussyhat Project, with a Groupon to learn how to crochet. Because part of my healing modality was that I had to make stuff. I'm a big maker of stuff. And I couldn't kind of figure out how to make stuff with very little cleanup. And then I realized I kind of knew how to knit. I had no idea how to crochet. It was time to get past that hurdle. And all pun intended, we were totally hooked. And we discovered there, a community, like a real community of people. And it was incredibly healing, not just the process of making, but the process of being with so many predominantly women of all different ages, and just being able to listen and be together. So during the summer of 2016, which now probably feels like eons ago, I wanted to participate in the campaign for Hillary Clinton, but was completely unable to in the way that I had understood how to do that. And Krista had done some traveling in Ohio to try to find swing voters, but I just felt like there was no way in for me. So when the election happened on November 8th, I was shocked, but not fully surprised, and really devastated, and didn't quite know how to how to process it. And so the first thing I thought of is, let's go to the little knittery where all these brilliant women are, and just hear what they know, especially the ones who are older, because I have gotten so much wisdom from this kind of moving group of women. And so we went 2 days after the election. The march had already been announced. It had already gone viral on Facebook. I think Krista already had her ticket. I knew I couldn't go because I couldn't be in large groups of people. I couldn't travel across the country in that way. I couldn't be around things that were like swinging close to my head. Like, this was just like not going to happen. And so when Chris and I went, we were talking about things she could do. And she was like, you know what? Like, I could do a performance. I could strip naked. And at first I thought that was kind of a brilliant idea. This is from all the sort of experiences that I had. One of them, kind of between college and graduate schools, I spent a year in Chile. And this is the work of Spencer Tunick when he came to Chile. And he does really large photographs of nude people. And I have a friend, Jose, in there somewhere. But why I'm showing you this is because in this country for over a month on the cover of like every magazine was, are we done with the dictatorship? Are we conservative? Are we more liberal than we think? And it really like fomented in my mind that art really can like bring up these political discussions. So I didn't think that was the worst idea, but she was from California and was going to be in DC in January. So that part was like not going to happen. We were also in a knit store and she had said, well, maybe I could knit a hat, which made a lot of sense and, practically, but also made a lot of sense in that this is the AIDS quilt from the 1980s that I remember as a child is the first project I had ever been aware of that was public art. And all of these are memorials, handmade and incredibly personal. And this was the project where I learned that politics is personal. And it has been with me ever since. And this is basically the same space where the march was going to take place. Um, and then this was the one other project that I flashed to, which is Christo and Jean-Claude in New York. It's the Gates Project. And it really showed how color in the middle of winter on the East Coast can have a huge impact. So we were starting from there. And so here's where we started with the diagram. Top left is the March on Washington, where MLK gave the I Have the Dream speech. And then below is a diagram of what if, when we looked at that photo for the Women's March, it had a color to it. It had this kind of presentation to it. And on the right is what we actually accomplished all together. I didn't ask this at first, but in this group of people, just raise your hands who participated in the Pussyhat Project in some way, shape, or form, either marching or making. You guys are amazing. Okay, so like this is you. This is you here. So honestly, a huge, gigantic thank you, because we figured out how to not only think of how to make a big impact on the mall, but also how to think about how do you participate in activism if the ways in which activism usually are performed are not necessarily serving you best. So how can we bring more people into the conversation? How can we get people more excited? So this is the front of our manifesto. In 6 days, we put together a manifesto of our two-part mission to create a big dramatic visual statement at the mall, and also to provide a way for people who could not be at the march, whether it be because of medical reasons like myself, or financial ones, or scheduling ones, that everyone could participate. So this is just part of the inside of it. You don't have to read all of this, but our two-part mission, but also thinking about, we chose pink because pink is a feminine color that's ascribed to girls. How can we make that show and be really strong? And how can we show individuals within a group of people and make this sea of pink pixels? This very simple diagram, the easiest project to make, and it is because I had to be able to make it. So I look at the Fuller Craft and all these incredible crafts people. Pussyhat is designed so that it can be the first project you ever do, or it can just be a diagram to challenge you to do something even more incredible. Within our manifesto, we also had 3 little templates to share between the maker and the marcher, so that then if you wanted to connect with someone, you could, and you could share a part of yourself. And then part of the design process is figuring out how to distill it so that everyone can participate and understand what to do. So on the right-hand side is our distribution system. And so we wanted knitters to knit hats, bring them to the march, get them to a local yarn store. We partnered with 175 local yarn stores across the country, made it really easy for them to say how they could get involved. And we sent people from across the country to those places. So that they could experience some of the local yarn store flavor that I hold so dear. And so that we could get people into groups to talk about political conversation. And then in the bottom, we had our distribution headquarters, which was someone's basement, the wonderful McKnight family. And then on the other side for wearers, you could pick up a hat from a knitter at a local yarn store or at the march. Then you're supposed to wear your hat. And if you wanted to contact the knitter and you got a note, you could say, hey, thank you so much. This was so wonderful. You're here with me. I got photos from the march. And for me, it was just incredible because I felt like I truly was there marching in hat. This is one of my favorite notes that I've seen. I can see part of it. Okay, here we go. And I think I'm going to talk while people read and tell you a secondary story. But I think this one I love because it's really talking about AAPI and hate, and how this was something that was going on years before we're talking about it this spring, and how important it is to stand up for other people whenever you see something going wrong. And this is from Myra and her story, but I love this last part. I'll read this part to you. So my experiences, including this one, inspired me to knit this hat for you to wear at the march. I'm a 5 foot tall, gray-haired woman marching in Seattle as you march in DC. I march in support of you, whatever your cause or passion. Together, let's stand tall and speak out for social justice. Um, so these notes, sometimes they just be like, I'm into girls' education, and that's fantastic. And some of them would talk about Planned Parenthood, about sexual assault. Some of them would be very short, some would be incredibly long. Sometimes people didn't share them, but it was this way of voices to be able to connect with one another, where it wasn't into just kind of avoid, but was like a true connection of being able to have contact. Okay, and as I mentioned in the diagram of the pussy hat, there's so many ways to make them, and they all look different. So this is one person with their notes, and some that they're very proud of. I think this person made like 150. It's just incredible. This is our local yarn store, and this is part of what was going on in the run up to the march. There's press in the background, but really what's most exciting to me is that there are girls sitting at the table, some young women who are learning how to knit for the first time. So they sat down for 4 hours and knit their pussy hats and did not leave until they were done. And then what I love this photo in particular, because our local yarn store became a distribution hub, and we had people coming in and bringing hats and people leaving with hats. And this woman came in 6 o'clock the night before the march, and she said she was getting on the red eye and did we have any hats? And someone had just dropped one off. We had one hat. We said, yes, we have one for you. The woman who dropped it off just left. So this woman in the middle ran out. She's like, oh, let me go thank her. And she ran out and she came back sobbing, like full sobbing. And she said, I've never felt so supported. And then all of us just started sobbing, and like the whole place was waterworks. And it was just so wonderful to bring someone who is from our neighborhood, who had never felt necessarily comfortable walking to a knit store because she wasn't a knitter, to feel like she really belonged there and that there were people who had her back. So this was our distribution headquarters in Reston, Virginia. It's the McKnight family, and they distributed, I think, close to 15,000 hats. Just amazing. Beth mentioned my background is also in economics, and we had a shortage of yarn across in different parts of the country, particularly like Seattle. So this was really exciting to me because we knew that we had affected the supply chain of pink yarn. And this was what you guys made. This is what we all made together. So whether you were at the march in DC, another march, whether you're marching from afar, whether you were doing like a one-woman march or in your living room, you are in here. You are part of this. And we made that sea of pink together. Here's a little bit more of a close-up. And I just love this one of just sort of the silhouette of what became an icon of a hat in front of the Constitution. This was my experience. I was above the Los Angeles March, watching it down below and on TV, just totally losing it and so excited and kind of overwhelmed. And then we saw pussy hats starting to go on statues. So on the right-hand side, very important to me as a child who grew up in Boston, to have the ducklings covered in pussy hats was really just very, very special. There's something very special about home. And then this is one of those examples of someone who marched, who wrote to someone who made her hat from a 7-year-old. She said, thank you for the awesome pussy hat. It fits perfectly. I'm so excited and proud to wear it at the Women's March. Meow. With I think, a wonderful drawing. And I know between this marcher and the person who made her hat, they met online and collaborated on the size of the hat and the color of the hat and all these different things. So this relationship was made between an adult woman and a child who's now part of her world. And this happened the day after. And I'll just run through these quickly. Just phenomenal things happen where we had set this up to create a sea of pink of women's rights supporters without the expectation to show up on the cover of magazines, on the Missoni runway, on Saturday Night Live, on the floor of Parliament in Scotland as tattoos. This is Swiss Parliament on International Women's Day, learning how to make pussy hats. And on the right is the exhibition at the Fuller. On the left, the Victoria and Albert Rapid Response Collection and the I Object show at the British Museum. And then, so all of this wonderful stuff is happening. And some of the critique that came back is not all pussies are pink and not all women have pussies. This is 1,000% true. Not all pussies are pink and not all women have pussies. We had designed the Pussyhat Project to be cat hats, so the little ears. And we chose pink because we were thinking of what is the color that's ascribed to girls. So blue for boys, pink for girls. And that was our design intent. We were pretty surprised that this happened, but I think what's really important to look at is why and to listen to why. We got, even though we had women of color who were part of the project, we had women across the gender spectrum, people across the gender spectrum who were part of the project. I think it's really important to not ignore this kind of criticism and what that means. And to me, it's really looking at the feminist movement overall and over time and who belongs and who doesn't, and how do we make space for everyone, and how do we make sure that everyone's voices are heard. Pussyhat Project was made to be a platform for participation, for people to talk about these issues. So we can talk a lot more about this, but I think it's really important first to listen and then to see what can be done moving forward. So part of that is what informs my next project, Welcome Blanket. So Welcome Blanket completely diverges from the idea of a single color, a single pattern. And what it is that it reimagines the border between Mexico and the US, the 2,000 miles, as 2,000 miles of yarn to make individual welcome blankets for new refugees coming to the United States. These are shown together and then at art institutions like the Fuller, and then distributed through refugee resettlement groups to their final homes. And so on the left-hand side is the Statue of Liberty, Emma Lazarus's poem of "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free," and Donald Trump's candidacy speech of talking about the southern border wall. I am the product of the American dream. My grandparents, 3 of the 4 of them, came by the Statue of Liberty. And when I was watching the airport demonstrations from the Muslim ban, I was just thinking how strange it must be to come in through an airport. And what are we doing for the immigrants who are coming here? And how are we welcoming them? And what can we do about it? So very different from sort of the base pattern of the Pussyhat. This is the Come Together pattern, also by Kat Coyle. And it's 16 squares, and they can be arranged in any which way. So there is no one welcome blanket. So unlike with a Pussyhat, where there's no one Pussyhat, but you know that it has those ears, a welcome blanket is 40 inches by 40 inches. It can be knit, sewn, crocheted, woven, figured out some other way. And it can be this pattern, or it can be pretty much anything that hurts a little bit to give away to someone else. So these are some examples of welcome blanket. And also with the welcome blanket, we asked makers to include information about their family's immigration, migration, or relocation story in words of welcome. I think the most important part of this is that in this note, they say, "You are truly welcome, and this is our country. It is now mine and yours." Some of the most beautiful stories get put together because we all have different stories of where we came from and why we're here. And I think from sort of Pussyhat and making sure that people's voices are heard, this is very much focused even more so on narrative and what people want to share about their story. And all of them are part of the larger Welcome Blanket story. You can make it on your own or in a group. It's good for introverts and extroverts. And this was our first show at the Smart Museum of Art at University of Chicago. We started with a totally empty gallery and just started collecting them as they came in. This was their basement, which was amazing. And then we used it as a way to activate the space. So on the left-hand side are volunteers cataloging all the different welcome blankets coming in and the different notes. And on the right-hand side is Doreen from the Fuller, sorry, not from the Fuller, from the Smart Museum, who was instrumental as part of the project. And she's pinpointing where different blankets are coming from. I believe we hit all 50 states. And then this is what it started to look like. It just filled and filled and filled and filled. And in front of us, you can see the notes, and people would sit down, read these notes, and bawl. I do projects where people cry. And you could feel the love. People would come in and touch the blankets. And look for their own. They made cross-country trips to come and see them. On the left-hand side are some actors and storytellers, and they loved the stories, so they decided they wanted to do a performance and also include their own stories. And on the right-hand side, you can see that we started stacking the blankets like bricks, even the part where they were going to be hanging. This is our online gallery, so that when someone receives a blanket, they can go to our gallery and know that it's not just one person who cares that they're here, but there are thousands of people who put in all of this effort and love because they wanted to welcome them. When you came to the gallery, you could leave notes if you wanted to. I think that there's some really wonderful parts of this, like, may you always feel the love that we stitched into this blanket. May you always know that you belong. And then different stories. One is about, I believe, Havana. Oh, sorry about that. One from Havana, one from being part of the slave trade and having that be her history. And I think all these stories together are really important to show for conversation. This is a picture of our Refugee Resettlement Summit. So we brought different refugee resettlement groups from across the country to talk about how to give these best and how to give gifts in a way that people want to receive them. So we wanted to work with these different groups to make sure that we were meeting their needs and making their jobs easier, and that we did this with sensitivity. Here's an example of a family that uses their welcome blanket front and center. And they're in Southern California, and just this lovely, they're just a lovely group that I know through Mary's List. So I personally know them. I've not been to their house, but I'm excited to see their welcome blanket. And then we started doing shows in different places. This is the lab school at University of Chicago. And on the right, students made this work from, I think they're third graders. These are all self-portraits, and this is one of my absolute favorites. This is the Museum of Design Atlanta. This is the Fuller Craft. This was a pop-up for Mary's List. And so before they gave away their blankets, they had a refugee celebration and welcome, and they wanted everyone to feel the love. So we unpacked them and then we repacked them again. This is Welcome Blanket Brookline, and we did a 3-evening programming around immigration, where the woman in the center is part of the IINE Suitcase Stories, where she shared her story of being a refugee and what that was like. On the right-hand side in the bottom are these music students who are sharing, I'm forgetting the name of the instrument, but it was absolutely beautiful, but a performance with an instrument from China. In the top right, that's the first day I ever quilted. And so there was a quilting lesson involved too, and also welcome blankets on display from this group in Brookline that had been working for a year on making welcome blankets and talking about immigration. We've gone out into the wild, onto the street. This is part of an immigration festival in Los Angeles. And we were also part of Build Peace, which was in San Diego and Tijuana. And on the left-hand side was in San Diego. And on the right-hand side, those kids are awaiting their immigration hearings for the United States, but they're in Tijuana, and had incredible concentration, and were just lovely, lovely children. And right now we have a special program for in between shows called Welcome Blanket on Call. So if you're interested in making Welcome Blanket right now and you don't want to wait for a show, you can go on to our website and get the address for Mary's List, and they're the ones that we're working with right now. So this is part of their welcome kits, and they love giving these to their people, their clients, their community, because this is a way that you can really feel the love. And we keep getting feedback of like, you can feel it because you can't fake craft. Very quickly, Mass for Humanity back in March of 2020. Some of you might actually be in here. We put together a hub for groups that needed cloth face masks and people who could make them. And this was a knit-a-thon that we did where we all got together and made some. I am possibly the slowest sewer of all time, but people are just incredible and rising to the challenge. And it really goes to show that a lot of the people who work on these projects are just the people I want to be around. Like they're the people you want to call when something goes wrong. Um, and then this is just totally outside of fiber, but kind of along the same lines. I made this in the past couple of years for a show, and it's a 4-foot long kaleidoscope that's is called "You Have an Interesting Face." And it was for a show that was a book club. But what I really wanted to do was to create a work where people within a gallery or on the left hand side that's part of a Pride festival had the opportunity to interact with something on their own or with someone else and kind of have that experience of being within a space and seeing it in a different way. And I just wanted to share that with you. And then I'm going to leave you on this one. I adore this photo. It was in the New York Times, and I think the blurriness of that color and how people kind of came together and created this mass together really demonstrates like the power of what we all did together. So like a huge thank you to everyone here who's participated in Pussyhat Project or Welcome Blanket or Mass for Humanity, because all of these projects happen because of the agency that people take on for these projects. And I feel like I build this infrastructure for these to happen, but they require everyone to participate to make them successful. So yeah, I'm ready for any questions that anyone might have. And again, a huge thank you for everyone who uses these platforms for participation.
Well, thank you so much, Jayna. That was so fascinating. And I have so many, so many comments and so many questions. And, I think I'll just start by sharing my own story with the Pussy Hat. And I remember like pretty much right away deciding with some friends of mine that we were going to go to the march. And then I saw something on social media about the Pussy Hats, and I sent it to my friends and I said, hey, there's this thing that's happening. We should all get or make the hats. And then a few, I won't say their names, but a few of my friends were like, well, I'm sure they'll have baseball hats that we can buy there and things like that. And I said, no, 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 you're missing the point. So in any case, I was one of the few in my group that had one. And I thought, am I going to be the only one at the march with this hat? And then I'll never forget getting to the train station we were in Annapolis and just seeing just at the train station trying to get into DC, the sea of hats. So I mean, what was it like for you as the co-founder of this project to look outside your room and see the march in LA? I mean, like
Um,
what kind of an experience was that?
I, I think even like, like even leading up to it, when you started seeing photos of people getting on planes all together and wearing pussy hats, like that to me just like
Yeah.
blew my mind. And I know this sounds really, much smaller, but a week into launching the project, a woman reached out to me who said that her daughter used to be a knitter, but she had this big head injury. So I had had a head injury. This like spoke to me. She didn't know. And she said that she only had use of one hand, but she figured out how to do loom knitting for pussy hats and she was making them. And I just had this feeling of like, I had such a deep seated desire that I wanted to make sure people felt like they could do that and get there and be there and like feel how important they are, that I lost it then. Like I have never cried so much as with like Pussy Hat and Welcome Blanket because of like the beauty of people's very personal stories. And it was overwhelming, and it still kind of blows my mind that it truly worked. Like there are
Yeah.
things that I showed you that I was like, this was a proposal for this, and I thought that would be a big thing, that we never won the proposal. Like it's just,
Yeah.
it exists, but this one worked. And I think it worked because it came from so much heart. And what I love is like whenever I talk with someone who's like, let me tell you my story, I get to know them in a different way. So like for me, the Pussyhat experience has kept extending, and I get to meet people in this incredible way and like sometimes hold their secrets, sometimes hold their joys. And for me, my whole world got so small after my accident, and then this just like busted it wide open, and like just it's just beautiful and wonderful. So um humbling. It's totally
Yeah.
humbling and amazing.
I'm sure. Yeah, and I think the stories, that's a great point too, because we, as part of our exhibition, we collected hats that people donated, and then this was on the exhibition opened on the 1 year anniversary of the march. And so we invited people to come in and take hats that were donated to wear to the marches that were happening on the 1 year anniversary, and invited people to write down their stories of the march in DC. And it was just so, talk about crying. I mean, there's so many moving stories about wearing the hats and making the hats and giving the hats. So I think, certainly all of the projects that you do, there's so much power in their ability to build community. And I think we saw that also with the welcome blanket that we had at Fuller Craft Museum, where we were a distribution hub also for a short time. And we reached out to a number of different agencies in Worcester, Massachusetts, that assisted refugees. And so we got to make those connections with the agency. It was a wonderful experience for us to be able to do that. We had people come in, reading the stories of Welcome Blanket. I mean, I think all the projects that you do are so powerful and really aim to bring people together. Um, so I'd love to hear just more from you about what why do you think craft has such potency to build community and to really use that connectivity to advance social change?
Yeah. I think craft is so special in that historically it already has like craft circles involved where you're doing something but you're also listening. Anyone who knows me really well knows that I talk a lot in small groups, but I'm really shy. Like I'm not usually like, hey everyone, come listen to me. And for me sitting in a craft circle, I just learn. I learn from everyone. And um, it's a great place to hatch a plan, right? Like, and there are always different skills, and there's a certain diversity, even to people within the same kind of community who's working together. And I think that that's a really great, like, node of political activism, of like sharing ideas and ideals. Um, I think craft is incredible because you can't fake it. Like, if you
I
make a
love that.
welcome blanket, it is hard to make a blanket. I am the slowest knitter. Like I imagine people in this group could like out, loop me, stitch me, read things, who are just making these incredible things. But, if you sit down for 25 hours to make a blanket because you care about someone who's coming to this country you'll never meet, like that has so much meaning. And I think also, especially we saw with Pussyhat, is these are gifts from one women's rights supporter to another. And when you start interacting through the process of giving a gift, you're already opening up yourself and the other person to a different level of, I'm starting to use the phrase like civic intimacy, but you connect in a different way. You're saying, like, I want to give this to you. Here's a little bit about me. And I love free stuff, right? Like, I just love free stuff. I walk in someplace, I get a sample, I feel great. But it's very different when someone sat down for hours to make me something and I don't even know them, even, or maybe they're a friend of a friend, and I just get it. Like, that's
Yeah.
something I want to hold on to. It's really funny because before the march, we started getting these emails of like, how dare you do so much wasteful stuff? These are all going to end up trashed and all this stuff. And I had done this big handout of how to get involved. And one of the things I wrote is like, after you go to DC, bring your hat back. And if you don't want it, donate it to a women's shelter. Like, if you don't want it. And we saw something very different where people held on to them. And I was looking for people to do museum donations. They're like, no, 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 I'm not giving you and it's not going to the Victoria and Albert. I'm like, really? You don't want your work in like a museum? They're like, no, 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 no. So I think it started to really speak to what people were feeling, and then the process of making is so meditative. And then on top of it, you're making something. So like for me, I'm a terrible meditator, or I'm a learning meditator, but I really enjoy the process of making because then I get to see what I did while I was thinking about something. So it's a very long answer to that, but I think craft is incredible. And oh, one more thing, when you're in a craft circle, you can be the absolute worst person in the room and no one cares. There's like
Worst
nothing.
person in what way? Worst person.
Oh, not emotionally. Worst crafter.
Okay.
Yeah, you can't be a terrible person and show up at the craft circle. You can just be
Like,
learning
what
to do
craft
it.
circle are you
No,
at?
no, I love every craft circle I'm a part of. I'm like, dang, where do these people come from? I'm so lucky. But you can be the least experienced, and
Yeah.
people will help you because they're just excited about what they're doing, and they want you to feel like you can come back again. And I think there are very few things in 2021 where you can be terrible at something and do it in a group, and people aren't like a little, and like you don't join a swim team if you can't swim,
Yeah.
right? Like, but you can join a knitting club if you don't know how to knit. And I think
Yeah.
that that's, once you get past that first hurdle of walking to a room where you don't know what you don't know, I find it incredibly inviting and very heavily women spaces, very women centered. And I find that groups of women that are doing things together tend to be rooms I love to be in. They feel very comfortable to me. That's not to say that there aren't men who participate in the projects or either of these projects or aren't fantastic people or knitters, but I think the sort of heavy woman centered spaces are really great spaces for dialogue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, what was so and is so powerful about the projects that you've done, in particular the Pussyhat Project and Welcome Blanket, is it empowers people to take action at a time when, particularly after the election in 2016, so many people felt helpless and just vulnerable, and it really was an affirming way for people to take action and to do something. And that alone not only helped the people that were receiving the hats and the blankets, but also themselves, not for the
Mhm.
meditative reasons that you mentioned, but also just feeling like they were doing something. And I think that that was such an important part of both of the projects. Oh, and there's my cat in the background. Just
It's perfect. It's a
pay no
Zoom
mind.
call.
He's trapped in here, so I'll let him out in a little bit. But yeah, I think that that's really was such a beautiful thing about one of the many beautiful things about both projects, which is
Yeah.
their ability to really empower people to take action.
Yeah. And I think this is like a form, this really to me is a form of architecture taking place where everyone
Mm,
has agency over their own hat. It's kind of like an old fashioned barn raising. Like everyone's got their, part to play. They have their detail that they can take ownership of, either wearing it or making it. And we have this network of all these different local yarn stores working together and, other different groups working together, but everyone's doing it kind of together and you get to be a part of something. And I think as you're talking about sort of to do something, I think there was such a large sense of isolation in 2016 and understanding like what happened in that election. Like, I thought this was 96% in the bag. Like, what happened to that
yeah,
4%? And sort of trying to understand almost like what is the reality. And there's nothing more real than getting your hands into something
yeah,
and pushing it around a whole bunch
yeah,
and making it into something.
yeah, yeah. We actually had an interesting comment in the chat that I want to hear your comments on. Um, the Pussycats also brought up a lot of political pushback, particularly in Ravelry.
Mhm.
So I don't know if you had any kind of thoughts about that, or I'd love to hear your idea,
Yeah.
comments.
So in all honesty, I am not I am a novice knitter. I'm pretty sure in this room, everyone is probably much stronger than I am at that. What I discovered on Ravelry from our Pussy Hat page is just an incredible group of people who are still posting and talking about politics to this day. And we set up the page, and I don't remember who the admins are. And if you're in the room, like, thank you, you're amazing, you're wonderful. And basically, they're like, we got this, like, you guys do your thing, like, we got the Ravelry, like, we know that you're not like on Ravelry very much, we've got this handled. And that's part of like all of these projects, there's people being able to be like, I know how to do this, I'm going to go do this. And I'm like, this is great, wonderful. So if there are any skills in this room of people who want to work on these projects, come find me, we'll find a place for you. And it's all, volunteer led. So in that way, it's been, really amazing. But I think with everything during the Trump administration, everything became much more separated. I think something, I don't know if this was directly with Pussyhat or not, but Ravelry started talking a lot more about racism in Ravelry and in the knitting community. I think that's so important, like
Mm,
just so incredibly important for us to be talking about.
yeah.
And so I think that that's incredibly kind of fruitful and wonderful of what kind of came out of that, because we have to make changes. And if we don't put names on things or talk about them, nothing's going to change. And I wasn't really present for much of the sort of pro Trump stuff that was going on Ravelry, but I know that there were threats that were made, and it was really difficult. And as a private citizen, I firmly applaud Ravelry for taking a stand and saying, like, we're not going to put our members in harm's way. Like, I know that we're supposed to look at both sides, but like, this
Yeah.
is this is not what that's about. So it's complicated. And I'm sure there are other people in this room who have even much more of a depth of knowledge of it. But I think, what we learned in the past through the past administration is sometimes there isn't both sides to everything.
Yeah.
And sometimes it is. Like there
Yeah.
sometimes, but just to say let's look at both sides is really is
It's complicated.
it's
Yeah.
complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but the
Yeah.
Ravelry people who participated in Pussyhat, oh my gosh, amazing. Like
Yeah.
I think so much of the reason why this works is because of like hardcore knitters and crocheters on Ravelry who
Yeah.
are like, I'm doing this. Here we go.
Yeah.
So I think that was one of our best ways of being able to get the word out.
Yep.
And yeah, mad respect for
Yeah.
knitters and crocheters on
That's awesome.
Ravelry.
Yeah. I wanted to read you too because I know that you probably haven't had a chance to look in the chat, but I just wanted to read a few comments, talk about stories. Susan says both projects helped many of us address the disaster in the White House. It helped us cope. I made hats for nieces who marched in 3 blankets so far. Awesome. Um, Sandy says I was flying the day before and had to change planes in Chicago, and the number of people flying into DC that I passed wearing theirs. Amazing. Cynthia says, what a wonderful and inspiring talk. Thank you. I had to turn off my video because you got me crying. um, One of the ladies here in Athens, Greece, made tiny pussy hats to hang on Christmas trees or where you want. I love that. Sandy says, I put my pussy cat on the girl statue on the New York City Day Without a Woman and have a photo of us, statue and me. So it's great. And I know, like I said, from our exhibition, there's so many great stories and really moving, and just evidence of how many people that your projects reach, and it's really incredible. It's really incredible. And I know we don't have a ton of time left, so I wanted to move on to two kind of standard program elements that we have with Collection Spotlight. The first is I ask our featured guests to select an object from our own collection that particularly resonates with them. And I was so excited with your choice, which I'm going to bring up. Oh boy, if you bear with me. Of course, now it's hold, please. Okay, sorry about this, guys. Okay. Okay, here we go. And you picked Tom Lozer's Double Rocker back to back, which I love seeing this, that you picked this piece, and I can't wait to hear why.
Well, I when I see things and I think, oh, I wish I had made that, is usually when it really resonates with me. So I love this for so many reasons. One is that it has a serious sense of fun to it. Like it just looks like you want to be on it, and it is something that you could use by yourself, but it's so much better if you do it with someone else. And there's this element of surprise of like the give and take between the two people who are rocking. I think, I could see a whole game that's happening and it's just in this object. So it's like this object, but you know that it's being used spatially and it's physically meant to be used. I just think is absolutely, absolutely beautiful. And that it's a take on some traditional, like we know it's a chair, we know it's a rocker, like we know what to do.
Right.
And so this is a way to really kind of riff on that, but make something new. It's just,
Yeah, and I think it's a perfect choice in a way for you because, Tom's this work in particular is about interaction and
mhm.
communication and conversations and what makes conversations flow, what makes them stagnate, how do we interact with each other, the interplay between socialization and isolation. So, given everything we've talked about over the last hour that's happening in society and how your projects really help support social change, I think this is such a great, such a great choice. I love it. So, and also the double rocker back to back was on display near the Pussyhat in a recent exhibition that we did called Shelter Play Social Distance. And in one of the themes on community, this was right near the
Cool.
Pussyhat. So it's kind of cool that you picked that. Um, Okay, and then I always ask our guests 5 questions that I just love hearing the different answers. And also, it's a great way to have this information for our collection files. So, the first question I have for you is, when did you first realize you wanted to work in the creative field?
Forever. Absolutely
Forever.
forever. I was I'd always in sort of art, I was always sketching, I was always making. When I got to college, I thought I was going to be a pediatric cardiac surgeon. Surgery is not for me. And then, you know, my parents were very concerned that I'd never get a job doing art. So I was also an econ major too. And what I learned is that art class was way harder than econ. Like you made something out of nothing in art, but econ at that level was like you learn math, it's fine. So I think I always wanted to, and I've always been doing it. And it's just if I don't make something for a while, or if I'm not thinking about how it gets made, I get very uneasy and restless. This is just kind of how my brain works.
Understood. Okay, what is your best advice for those starting a career in the arts?
Um, I remember seeing this question. Okay, so I think it depends. I think some people make art for a hobby, and I think that that's wonderful. Like if you make art just for you, like keep making art just for you. I think as a profession, it's sort of thinking about where it can go, what it can do, and do you have the resources to be able to make it, and how can you get those resources? I think the arts can be a wonderful, beautiful place to be. But I don't think it's for everyone. I think a lot of people usually really just want to make things on their own time. And I think that's wonderful and
Yeah.
great. So, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely, having worked in the arts for as long as I have, I agree. I think it's can be a really difficult road, but also if that's what's, you're meant to do, then you have to follow that. So, although I don't know how I would feel if my kids came to me and said they wanted to be an artist. I would support them every step of the way, but
Yeah.
um, okay, what other artist or designer would you like to work with?
Oh my god! When I saw this question, I started writing down like 1,000 people. I love, sort of from people that I know. There are a lot of people I from graduate school in architecture who Binu Tulu-chan. I love working with Christian Stanier, Anya Sirota, who might be people that you know or don't know. Um, I'd love to work with Amanda Williams at some point, who's a wonderful architecturally trained artist.
Mm,
I mean, I wouldn't mind working with like Lady Gaga or Lizzo on something. Like, there's just,
sure.
the world is so open. And I think, you know, I think everyone has something to bring to the table. So I think a lot of it is what opportunities show up,
Yeah.
and what is the timing. And I think as long as my world stays open like that, I'm really excited to see what transpires in the future. I love working with other people, and I love like sort of that mashup of when different sort of skill sets come together and different perspectives come together. But I also know that you can't just force it. So
Yeah.
we'll see. We'll see if Lizzo wants to give me a
Yeah.
call.
Well, she should, and that was a great answer. Um, what is your most important tool? Is there an item that you can't live without in your creative practice and or studio?
Interesting.
So for the work that I have been doing, it's people. It's like all of these, I'm creating these platforms and these infrastructures and these concepts, but it requires people to want to do them, and their time and their effort. So I think that that would probably be with the work that I'm doing right now, like the
Mm,
most important part. And I don't have much quit in me. So I think that that's also really important too. Like I
yeah.
like to fiddle and I'm very patient. Like I know Pussyhat happened very fast, but there's a lot leading up to it. Like I just like the tinker, the understanding, the relentlessness of trying to make
Hmm.
things better. So I think that too. These
Yeah.
are very long answers to short
No,
questions.
no, it's great. That's good. I love it. I love it.
Nice.
And last but not least, what do you want your legacy to be? Big
um,
question.
yeah.
So does not need a short answer.
Um, I would like to leave the world better than how I found it. I'd like to leave it more just, more beautiful, more joyful, more fun, and more open for people to be who they really are.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think that's a wonderful
Yeah.
way to leave the planet. So yeah, and also to wrap up our program. So thank you so much. Oh, and one comment you have already. So you've accomplished. What a
Oh,
great
I
group
need to
we
turn off
have
the video
here.
and start falling.
Oh, what a great group we have had here for this program. So thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, Jayna, for being here with us. And the hour just flew by. I wish we had more time, but it's getting to be dinner time. I'm sure people want to get going. And thank you so much. It was wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you all
Thanks,
for being
everybody. Thanks for coming.